The night was dark on the Adriatic Sea off the coast of Abruzzo, and only the stars were left to illuminate the way south. A local folk song resounded in the head of the boat's improvised captain as he surveyed the horizon from the open sea to the shore. Lontane, più lontane, delle lontane stelle, luce la luce più belle che mi fa ancora cantare. Its regional dialect echoed from afar. Farther and farther than the farthest stars shines the brightest light that still makes me sing. As he turned his eyes toward the muted grimaces of the 30 fugitives that he was carrying away from the bordering region of Marche, still under German control, a lighthouse flash almost reached the boat from the coastline, and upon its inland spin, illuminated the contour of a castle. That was Ortona. The captain recognized it with relief, as the Gustav line was only a few miles south by the Sangro River. A few hours later, he and his companions would find safe landing off the coast of Puglia in the Tremiti Islands. It was the morning of October 6, 1943. That strange Italian soldier with a perfect British accent who had fled the Italian regular army after the armistice, finding refuge in a villa near Ascoli Piceno, that unlikely sailor who had fortunately found an abandoned boat in San Benedetto del Tronto and thus saved a group of fugitives, some of them Jews, was Uguccione Ranieri di Sorbello, the 37-year-old son of an Umbrian marquis and an American businesswoman. A few hours later, he reached Termoli with some British soldiers, and it was there that the British military intelligence immediately recruited Uguccione, or as they named him, Hugh, charging him with the mission to rescue Allied soldiers trapped by the German army beyond the Gustav line after the Italian armistice on September 8, 1943. By sea and land, Hugh would save and give medical care to as many as 900 between the fall of 1943 and the spring of 1944, thanks to the Rat Line, or clandestine network of assistance he had created in collaboration with the local population. He would move up north following the line of fire, but after taking part in the Battle of Florence in July 1944, he would then be recalled south to Brindisi, where he would be trained as a parachuter. In April 1945, Uguccione and his operator Alfio Grassi would be key actors in the Spider mission, aimed at establishing an embedded radio station in the enemy-controlled territory of Trentino and creating an evacuation route for Allied prisoners in the Alps. In May 1945, Uguccione would even reach Austria, where he collaborated in the liberation of Allied prisoners in Klagenfurt and Graz. He would be honored with 2 medals for his valiance. Uguccione's war story is a great testimony to the contributions that any person, even a single individual, can make in a larger and often out of our control context. His service, however, was not an isolated moment of heroism, but rather the coronation of a previous path and the prefiguration of his later journey. Although he had never been a captain, Uguccione Ranieri di Sorbello was used to crossing seas. He had traveled across the Atlantic Ocean on several occasions before the war. Although he had never been a parachuter, he was used to being an embedded linguistic ambassador from his days as an Italian teacher in the United States in the 1930s. At the same time, Uguccione would never lose sight of the light at the end of the tunnel which made him sing, the shore of freedom beyond the darkness at sea, the new April beyond the winter of 1943, the new spring of the nation beyond the rubble of war, and the renaissance of Italy in post-war America. This rebirth was the true object of his lifelong endeavors, from his pre-war work as a teacher of Italian language and civilization to his post-war return to America in his new role as cultural ambassador, lecturer, and editor of the bulletin The Italian Scene. Ocean crossings were part of Uguccione's story. His American mother, Romaine Roberts, had first traveled across the Atlantic Ocean in the late 19th century, when her parents decided to leave behind the terrible loss to scarlet fever of her two older sisters and moved from New Jersey to start anew in Dresden, Germany. Romaine was the only heir of a successful business founded by her grandfather, Christopher Robert, who had made his fortune by importing coffee, sugar, and tea to the United States, and who had financed the first U.S. educational institution abroad, the Robert College in Istanbul in 1865. Starting in 1896, Romaine frequently traveled to Italy, and while in Rome in 1901, she met an Umbrian marquis who noticed her at Teatro Argentina because she laughed in the same points as he did during a comedy show. The following year, Romaine married the Marquis Ruggero Ranieri Bourbon di Sorbello and moved to Perugia with him. In 1903, she founded an embroidery business at the family estate of Pischiello, starting an entrepreneurial path which gave her the opportunity to travel again to both Europe and America. She would later develop a New York branch of textile female industry with her friend Carolina Amari. Uguccione must have heard the stories of his mother, of her first trip to Europe, and of her business trips, and like her, certainly saw the ocean as a wider horizon beyond the austere walls of the Sorbello Palace. But the first time he stepped on board a transatlantic liner was at age 16 in 1922 with his grandmother, Charlotte Shaw. Before then, his childhood was spent between Perugia, Rome, and the Pischiello estate, in the company of his two brothers and the British governess Gertrude Weatherhead, an educated and qualified professional who experimented with the Sorbello children the new Montessori materials bought by Romaine for the rural school she had started in the family estate. Uguccione would pick her British accent and would be, as he stated later, a guinea pig of Montessori as she was writing the method. During this time, Uguccione's grandmother was an important presence for the boy, as she read out loud to him, established a vivid connection to his American story, and shared the memories of her numerous transatlantic travels. Now, Uguccione's first trip to the United States left an indelible impression upon him, a feeling of infinity, as he would call it later, which related not just to the larger scale of a metropolis like New York, but also to a new sense of independence and fulfillment in earning his first salary while working as an elevator boy at the Hotel McAlpin between Broadway and 31st Street. It was this experience of freedom that would later move him, after completing a law degree, to leave behind the medieval walls of Perugia and his father's pressure to become a lawyer and escape to America. Uguccione would often go back to his ocean nights, to the limbo in between the dimly lit stars above and the parting waves below, and would compare the boat's line to his own destiny, as stated in his later poem Trans Flumen Oceanum, where he pictures himself longing to see beyond the horizon's limit. Walk, O transatlantic bewitched ship, move forward. There is time, there is always tomorrow, and certainly tomorrow we will know. Cammina, o transatlantico, nave stregata, cammina, c'è tempo. C'è sempre domani, e certo domani sapremo. It's in this open sky that Uguccione's life will unfold, in the ocean, as a mental territory in between his Italian aristocratic heritage and his American sense of adventure, as a bridge between risk and safety, as a necessary passage between rootedness and audacity, as a crossroads between tradition and modernity, and as a platform of exchange between the old and the new worlds. Through the ocean, Uguccione escaped to the United States in 1930 and started a completely new story. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he did not leave Italy because of fascism, as would intellectuals like Borgese, Gaetano Salvemini, and Arturo Toscanini. He did not live because of poverty like the immigrants who flooded American shores at the turn of the 20th century, or debt, as for many travelers of the early 19th century. including Mozart's librettist Lorenzo da Ponte. What he was leaving behind was his father's authoritarian and suffocating presence. It follows then that as he started teaching Italian in the United States, his main interest was not political, even though he shared the fascist commitment to endorsing a positive image of contemporary Italy, but rather cultural and existential, as he realized the growing interest of American students in Italian language and culture and genuinely promoted what he saw in parallel with his life situation as a rebirth. The United States gave Uguccione a fresh new start and a new outlook on Italian culture. Like Da Ponte, who moved from being an unknown Italian tutor in Sunbury, PA, to founding the first Department of Italian Studies at Columbia University, Uguccione also started in the new environment as an embedded alien without a safety net coming from previous status or fame, and learned over the years to communicate and stage his heritage in front of an increasingly curious audience. While teaching Italian language, literature, and culture courses at Yale University and Middlebury College in the early 1930s, Uguccione in fact devoted all his efforts to activate the Italian cultural patrimony through publishing, as editor for the Italy America Review, through his lectures on Italian literature and civilization organized in collaboration with the Casa Italiana at the Waldorf Astoria of New York, and through theater with the creation and direction of his own play, Con le signore c'è più gusto, with ladies there's more taste, staged in 1934 at the Yale Experimental Theater and published 2 years later in New York using some innovative graphic strategies designed to make Italian pronunciation more accessible to English native speakers. As Yale faced a financial deficit, Uguccione was dismissed from his position in 1935. He stayed 2 more years in the US, working primarily for the Italy America Society and teaching in the summer in Middlebury, and was finally forced to return to Italy. Over the following years, he would serve in Rome as the first secretary of Minculpop, the newly founded Ministry of Popular Culture, as the host of a weekly radio show providing English lessons to an Italian audience, and during the war as director of the foreign press and censor of English documents and publications. This period between 1937 and 1943 represents what historians would later define as lungo viaggio, long journey, an experience shared by a whole generation of young Italian men and women. Uguccione's lungo viaggio was a journey from the isolation of his return, as his father did not welcome him back, to professional independence, and in parallel from his initial annoyance at the fascist bureaucracy and racial laws to his anti-fascist choice. First, as a member of the liberal group pressuring King Victor Emmanuel III to depose Mussolini, an event which eventually took place on July 25, 1943, after the Allied landing in Sicily, and then as an embedded or parachuted Italian officer working for the Allies behind enemy lines. In the post-war years, the decorated veteran Uguccione Ranieri di Sorbello would continue to play a key role in the newly formed Italian Republic as press delegate at the International Peace Conference of Paris, an official of the Ministry of Tourism. His commitment to Italy's reconstruction and transition to democracy also found expression in his collaboration with Borgese's project of a world federal government and in 2 literary fictions on contemporary politics. This rich post-war period ended abruptly in 1951 with the sudden death of his mother Romaine, with whom he had always been in touch. This event opened a new chapter in Uguccione's life, which led him to marry Marilena De Vecchi the same year, and in 1953 to accept a new American mission as cultural attaché at the Italian Embassy in Washington, with the task of managing the cultural office at the Consulate General of Italy in New York City. His previous experiences as teacher, journalist, lecturer, and communicator found a new synthesis in this role. His return to America after his mother's passing gave him occasion to bring to maturity his vocation as bridge builder and spokesman of Italy's modern Renaissance. His masterpiece, was the bulletin The Italian Scene, a 20-page publication starting in 1953, which aimed at presenting Italy's innovations in the fields of culture, technology, and industry, really the forerunner of Italian innovators. What made the Italian Scene a phenomenal tool of cultural influence, which repositioned Italy's previous associations with crime, immigration, or dictatorship within a narrative of renewed appeal in the arts and commerce, was Uguccione's ability to translate words and ideas, to present an intelligible image of contemporary Italy, and to stage contents in a substantive, light, and persuasive way. So, a synthesis of teaching, self-discovery in dialogue with another culture, and theater. As indicated in the bulletin's title, the Italian Scene was in fact a performative stage of miscellaneous and interrelated topics. There even was a rubric entitled Of This and That, and was also a sounding board, allowing a new discourse on Italy to emerge in the American context in conjunction with posters, booklets, and lectures that surrounded this publication. The bulletin was published from 1953 to 1957, and after a short break coinciding with Uguccione's return to Italy from 1958 until his death in 1969, reaching a peak of 13,000 copies and an audience of academics, professionals, and lovers of Italian culture. Uguccione and his wife Marilena traveled numerous times across the ocean, nurturing their relationship even more after the birth of their son Ruggero, and continuously bridging Italian and American cultures. In these transatlantic travels, Uguccione developed a deep interest in and identification with the 15th century Italian sailor Giovanni da Verrazzano. As the city of New York completed the bridge connecting Staten Island and Brooklyn in the 1950s, Uguccione, who had lobbied to restore the Meucci house in Staten Island, where the Italian inventor hosted Garibaldi and experimented with the telephone, launched a public campaign to name the bridge, initially dedicated to FDR, after Giovanni da Verrazzano, the first to explore the Manhattan Bay in 1524. Overshadowed by Christopher Columbus, Giovanni da Verrazzano was a relatively unknown figure until 1908, when the original Italian report of his journey to King Francis I of France was discovered in Rome after many centuries. The US investor John Pierpont Morgan immediately acquired the letter, which he defined as America's birth certificate, bringing it to New York, where it is now housed in the Morgan Library. Building on this story, Uguccione Ranieri wrote about the sailor to educate the American audience and lobbied for his recognition in the naming of the bridge, which is now the Verrazzano Bridge, with the second Z only added in 2018. This bridge, like the ocean, is the simplest and shiniest metaphor of his lifelong effort to connect words, not as a mere act of translating words and ideas from one language to another, but rather as the ability to turn them into living and interacting stories. We see this in his last years, where as an American in Italy, he gained a new insight into his native Umbria, as seen in his historical fiction and archival research on Perugia's history. And also, as an Italian in the United States, he gave witness to the vital energy and origin of America. Uguccione's polyvalent work, mixing teaching, research, theater, lecturing, and storytelling, truly embodied the idea of cultural diplomacy as a living translation, a dynamic enactment, and an explorative bridge-building mindset. There is always tomorrow, and tomorrow will know, Uguccione wrote in the poem we quoted. His life and his work were the quest for this tomorrow, in a long cultural journey that at an individual and international level turned the ocean from an obscure limbo into an open space of interaction, and its crossings from an escape route to a laboratory of new transnational relations. In this sense, the physical and imaginative architecture of the Verrazzano Bridge and the Italian Scene reflect the core of Ranieri's activity as a cultural explorer and bridge builder. Uguccione died suddenly in Rome of a heart attack in 1969. He was only 63 years old. His living legacy continues today in the Fondazione Ranieri di Sorbello, which his wife and son established in Perugia in 1995 to honor him and his mother Romaine. The The foundation similarly aspires to foster the reciprocal understanding and intercultural exchange between Italy and the United States through the organization of lectures, internships, research projects, fellowships, publications, and cultural events. In an upcoming interview on Italian Innovators, we will discuss its mission and publications in depth and present the extraordinary figure of Romain Robert. For now, I invite you to visit the webpage www.sorbellofoundation.org to learn more about the continuing heritage of its inspiring founder, Uguccione Ranieri di Sorbello. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this episode, I invite you to subscribe to this YouTube channel or to the webpage www.italianinnovators.com to receive notifications of new episodes. You can also follow me on my LinkedIn profile or on Instagram at Italian Innovators for additional materials about the show. Thanks again. Arrivederci e alla prossima.